Hello and welcome to Verbal to Visual. Today I would like to address a question that often comes up for sketchnoters after they've learned the basics of visual note-taking and added a handful of elements to their own visual vocabulary, maybe a set of basic icons that you know how to draw comfortably. The question becomes, how might you go about expanding your visual language in a way that helps you capture more complex ideas, or maybe ideas that are more specific to the industry in which you work? So that's the question that we're going to explore today, and I have 3 specific tips, 3 ways to approach this question, 3 ways that you can go about expanding your own visual language. The first thing to try out is simply merging 2 icons. Once you've gotten comfortable drawing some simple icons, start experimenting with what it might look like to merge 2 icons that initially are totally unrelated. Here's an example. If you start with this simple line drawing of a flower and think about how you might merge that with this gear icon, you might get something like this. The gear replaces the flower, and then instead of the leaves below it, maybe you replace those with screws. And here you've got an object that merges the mechanical with the organic, which maybe could represent machine learning or artificial intelligence or biomimicry. So essentially what you're doing here is creating new visual metaphors by smashing together 2 simple icons. The 2 that I chose here came from the visual vocabulary pack that's included with my intro course, an introduction to visual note-taking. So feel free to dig into that if you want to check out some other icons. And this general idea here was the premise of a video that I created a few years back with my friend Austin, in which we used story cubes as the source of the 2 icons, and we had to come up with our own ideas of what the combination of those might look like. That was a pretty fun video worth checking out. What I find interesting about this first method here is that you can get to surprisingly complex and nuanced ideas by merging together just 2 fairly simple icons. So I think that can be a great way to start expanding your visual language as you develop your own visual metaphors that you might be able to use within your notes. My second tip here is somewhat related. Instead of a specific activity, it's actually a website that I highly recommend you check out called the Noun Project. This is a website for designers who are in search of icons that they might be able to use in their creative project. Their tagline is icons for everything, and the archive is pretty huge. One of the things that I like about their website is that they have new featured icons each day. That makes for great source material if you're looking for some daily warm-ups or some daily skill building activities to check in on the site and just draw the most recent icons. And what I appreciate about the icons that you'll find there is that there's a nice variation from simple to complex. A lot of the icons are very straightforward and easy to draw, but then there are some that are fairly complex that will help you to stretch your drawing skills to the point where you can accurately represent more complex objects. One activity that I encourage you to try out using the Noun Project as some source material is to start by warming up with the 5 latest icons that you see featured there. Try drawing each of them, and then from those 5 that you just tried drawing, pick the 2 that you feel like might be the most useful for your note-taking purposes, and try altering them in some way. That ability to slightly alter the visual representation of a particular object can be really helpful when you're capturing ideas at a conference or in a meeting or from a podcast that you're listening to, because small alterations can help you to tailor that image more directly to the ideas being shared. So here's an example of that. Here are 5 different icons that I sketched out one morning, and I decided to focus in on these 2 to try altering: a conveyor belt and a news van. And with my alterations here, you can see that I tried to add a little bit of complexity to the conveyor belt, add one more chain to that system, because I feel like the general concept of a conveyor belt is the type of system that might make for a useful analogy for some set of ideas or some process that might come up. And with the news van, the alteration was quite a bit simpler. I swapped out the small antenna that felt more fit for a car and replaced it with a bigger satellite-looking thing. And whether or not you actually use these these icons or your alterations in the future, that's not all that important, because what you're developing here is this core skill of manipulating the visual representation of these objects, of these processes. And it's that skill that's going to come in handy the next time you're trying to come up with a specific visual to connect to the idea, the process, or the story that you're taking in. Speaking of stories, I think that's where this third and final approach might come in handy, which is to start creating scenes. I like to think of scenes as something you might see out the window or what you might capture in a photograph, but with much lower resolution, and sticking to the use of multiple simple images to depict a situation. Here's an example of a scene that I sketched out when taking notes on a podcast conversation between Debbie Millman and Ingrid Fattel-Lee on Millman's podcast Design Matters. I will link to the blog post with the full sketch notes of that conversation down below. In this case, joy was being described as a wave coming at you that you can either choose to embrace or throw up your arms and try to block. And this little scene that I've sketched out here is really just the combination of a few different simply drawn elements. On the one hand, we've got the water. Then there's this singular wave drawn big enough to be able to write the word joy inside of it. And then there's a simply drawn stick figure. So what I hope this shows is that scenes don't have to be super complex or artistic. It's really just about finding a few visuals to capture the setting and just a couple of important objects or characters that are the important role players in whatever situation you're depicting. And much like the merging of two icons or the alteration of an icon, the creation of scenes is something that you can get better at with practice. So that's what I encourage you to do now. Pick at least one of these approaches to expanding your own visual language and give it a try. Because I think that it's these types of alterations, these types of creations that really allow for you to personalize the notes that you're taking. They allow you to create something that you've never created before, and maybe something that no one has ever created before. And it's those types of visuals that can really stick in your brain and give you a solid connection point to the ideas that those visuals represent. So I hope you enjoy trying out these activities for yourself. If you'd like to check out some other resources to help you build and apply your sketchnoting skills, check out the courses available at verbaltovisual.com. You can find links for those down below this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Till then.